Once again, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you again for joining us for Coalition's final policyholder security webinar of 2021. Today, we're talking about some cyber threats, some risks, some vulnerabilities that we have seen that seem to be particularly holiday focused, some of the issues that we have seen in prior incidents or prior issues, things that have turned into claims. And hopefully, once our panelists have shared all of the knowledge that they have, we'll give you some tools, tips, and tricks as well to avoid these causing an incident at your business. Again, we are using Zoom today as our webinar platform. Your microphones and videos are turned off by design. That is intentional. If you do have a question, please feel free to use the chat or use the Q&A. We've got a couple moderators here who are watching that. So if you do have a question throughout, please feel free to ask it whenever. We've also reserved some time at the end for questions if you do have those. So post your questions whenever. If we don't answer it when you post it, we will go through the Q&A at the end and make sure that we took care of all of those. Today's webinar is a little bit different. Instead of me talking about a topic for an hour, I decided to get some of our amazing folks from Coalition to join me for a little panel discussion, a roundtable on this topic. We'll go around and do a quick introduction here. First and foremost, I am Aaron Kraus. I'll be your moderator today. I'm also Security Engagement Manager here at Coalition. So I help our policyholders as well as broker partners understand all of this cybersecurity stuff that we're talking about. Turn it over to our first panelist, Kirsten, Claims Counsel. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Kirsten Mickelson, and I am an attorney on the claims team at Coalition. I've handled cyber and technology first party and third party liability matters for about 9 years now. And before that, I was in private practice, advising insurer clients on complex coverage issues, policy wording, regulatory compliance, and of course, coverage litigation. I sort of fell into tech and cyber when they were newer specialty lines, and I haven't looked back.
Awesome. Thanks again for agreeing to join us. Next up, Shelley, who is a member of Coalition Incident Response or CIR team.
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to speak with everyone today. My name is Shelley Ma, and I'm an incident response lead with Coalition Incident Response. I work very closely with the claims team, so Kirsten and her team, on responding to cyber incidents that our insurers experience. My background is in digital forensics and incident response, and I've been doing this now for almost 7 years. So very excited to dive into this topic with you all.
And last but certainly not least, a title that barely describes all the cool stuff that he does. We have Zoltan Williams, one of our security engineering managers.
Hey everybody, my name's Zoltan Williams. As already stated, I'm the security engineer manager. Basically just means I look at all the signals and data, and if I do my job well enough, I will decrease the amount of claims work that actually has to happen. I'm a full-time memer, former military. I actually had a chance to become a spy for the government, but it didn't pay as well as this, so now I'm here helping these guys out.
Good times. The story changes a little bit every time we go through it, and it's always funny. We're going to run through 3 things today. I will start by setting the stage with a little bit of an example from recent history. We saw an attack against a managed service provider called Kaseya around the July 4th holiday, and the attackers picked a holiday for a very particular reason. So we'll use that to set up some of the problems, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists to talk about really what it is that we see leading to an increase in cyber incidents around the holidays, some of the motivations, some of the things to be on the lookout for. As we go throughout, we'll obviously be sharing not only some of the problem, but also the solution, and we'll of course wrap up with how to stay off the naughty list, how to, if at all possible, avoid having a cyber incident around the holiday season here. If you've attended one of our webinars in the past, you know you're probably sick of hearing me talk about holistic, proactive cyber risk management, but obviously the most effective way to deal with security incidents is to prevent them from happening in the first place. So ways that you can protect yourself, something that Coalition is very big on. As mentioned, we'll also have a Q&A at the end. I've already seen quite a few questions come in and lots of chat in the lots of messages in the chat. So feel free to keep those coming. And with that said, let's kick it off. Kaseya is what is known as a managed service provider, or an MSP. Basically, they take care of some aspects of your technology in an outsourced model. Here in the US, July 4th is a pretty big holiday in 2021. This actually fell on a Monday, so a lot of folks also took a Friday off as a way to make it a 4-day weekend. Attackers unfortunately know that people tend to take holidays, that they tend to be a little bit distracted around holidays, and we actually saw a breach of Kaseya that was detected around July 2nd. So just as people were starting to leave, some people left a little bit early on Friday, some people took Friday off altogether. Kaseya's incident response team detected an attack and advised customers to shut down their Kaseya software, shut down the particular impacted module or platform. Obviously, that message was probably going to a lot of IT teams where, guess what? People had already left for the afternoon. People were taking a long weekend. Next day, July 3rd, was formal confirmation from Kaseya that they had experienced a breach, and US law enforcement became involved. And you see a bit of a lag time before the first patch was available. It was all the way until July 11th. So obviously a scramble. And of course, again, compounding the issue, the fact that a lot of folks were out of the office, were not available. Don't want to go into too much detail. If you want to read the full timeline, there's a great CSO online article. We've got the link down here at the bottom. Multiple patches had to be released, lots of iterative work there. Interesting follow-up, and something that I don't think got quite as much coverage. Consequences for this breach. Actually, last month in November, the US Department of Justice announced charges against a Russian national, as well as charges and arrest of a Ukrainian national for the breach of Kaseya. Coalition unfortunately did see this impacting some of our policyholders, and some of the issues that led to it being more of a serious breach than it otherwise might have been are the things that we're going to talk about now. So with that said, I want to turn it over to the panelists. And our first question actually is going to go to Kirsten. You're up on tap here to talk about some of the issues that we saw around lack of focus and as well as coverage issues. So one question that I know we wanted to talk about was getting into what Coalition calls our Super Bowl season, that period between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And if you could give us some details about what Coalition has seen in the past, and what do we see particularly around the holidays driving security incidents?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. We do try to make it as exciting as possible here. So we do call this time frame our claims Super Bowl. This is between Thanksgiving and I'd say right after New Year's, from early January. There is a 3-day weekend in January that kind of sneaks up quite quickly after being out for a couple weeks, MLK weekend. For our Super Bowl, no betting goes on, but we're a team and we pinch hit for each other at, I have to tell you, the oddest times. Past experience at Coalition and also my previous carriers is very similar in that we do see an uptick in incidents being reported generally. So it is a time to be on high alert. The majority of reported incidents during our Super Bowl is business email compromises. We refer to that as BECs. This is where a threat actor gains access into your system and sends emails from a legitimate employee's account. Another one is wire fraud, or what we call fraudulently transferred funds, or FTFs, and ransomware. Ransomware. We see an uptick in these three, and since we started this webinar, it's 10 minutes in. I've seen a few incidents roll in just now, and it's only 10 a.m. Pacific because I'm in California. For the wire fraud uptick, it's really likely because invoices are due with the year ending. Organizations want to close their books, settlements occur for bookkeeping reasons, and employees just want to wrap up. They want to finish outstanding tax and go enjoy themselves. I think threat actors have an awareness of this sense of closure, coupled with the knowledge that people do take time off and offices do shut down. So these threat actors strategically monetize on that opportunity. Often threat actors pretending to be a trusted source will attach some sense of urgency to a payment for these wire fraud incidents we see, meaning the invoice needs to be paid ASAP or immediately in all caps to conveniently updated banking account information, or the recipient, the duped recipient needs to approve this payment immediately before the holidays, before you leave. So the unassuming employee acts quickly as requested to comply with the threat actor's requests, who's purportedly a trusted source to wrap this all up. Ransomware is sort of the same thing. a threat actor may be very well lurking in the system well before the holidays, but is aware that it can maybe extort the most money during a time when an organization wants to wrap up and close its books, and uses that time frame to lock up systems and demand maybe a little more than it would normally demand. And going back to Erin's question, sort of why the uptick, I know Shelley and Zoltan will get more into sort of security posture, but generally people let their guards down. They're busy, like I said, wrapping up year-end tasks, doing important things on mobile while traveling, not really paying attention, delegating tasks to someone that wouldn't normally have authority or awareness of standard operating procedures, or just juggling other personal responsibilities while working, just making it easier to miss something. And a classic, all too common example is where a threat actor spoofs an email that looks like it's coming from a legitimate source, like my boss or Erin or Shelley or Zoltan. And so the recipient has a level of comfort and trust, maybe provide sensitive information or approvals on mobile. On the mobile, the name would just pop up and it's harder to read the actual email address and maybe see that the L in coalition is really an I. You'd have to click on it and be very deliberate to check the email. So it does look legitimate. If you're on a computer or otherwise at a desktop, you might be alerted of the spoofed email address or that something looks off. It'd be a little more visible. And so the threat actor would often send these spoofed emails with knowledge that the recipient is traveling out of office or otherwise not at a desk. And on the claim side, this does lead us to believe that threat actors then had access to the system sooner, maybe reviewed calendars, travel emails, or other documentation that indicated that the compromised user or duped recipient was on the go. And also, like I mentioned, it's so often the case that these threat actors are in the system well before the holidays. Aware that office is closed, certain users are out of office, so they'll just sit in the network, poke around, access stuff to see when the best time is to pounce. And when to pounce depends on the motives. Usually, most often it's to monetize. It could be to pounce right before a retailer's biggest time of the year, like Black Friday or the big shopping weekend before Christmas, which is this weekend, in hopes of extorting larger ransom payments, or maybe to pounce right after New Year's, when employees, for example, in a professional services organization have been away for a week or two and need to start billing work or doing billable work. So uptick in BECs, wire frauds, and ransomware, I have to say they are the majority of the reported matters where we do see that general uptick. There are two other incidents that we see every single year after the holidays without fail. And these are fraudulent unemployment claims, and then what we call W-2 phishing incidents. First, the fraudulent unemployment claims. They're just incidents where a policyholder gets notification that unemployment claims of a current or former employee were fraudulently filed on their behalf. This requires usually a social security number and other personally identifiable information. It's what we call PII. You need that to file it. So usually, not always, these fraudulent claims correspond with the larger data breach at the enterprise level. So we have to investigate, ensure the compromised organization is meeting privacy obligations under the law and notifying compromised users. And then it's my favorite, the W-2 phishing incidents. I have 7 years in the running. This hopefully isn't the 8th, maybe it's not, but these are, it's where a threat actor takes over an email account, such as the head of HR, for example, or spoofs an email of a trusted contact and asks the person in charge of generating and mailing W-2s to review them in advance before they get mailed out. I have to say the language the threat actor uses is the same every year. And one year, the threat actor forgot to update the year, and the recipient was still duped into sending out the entire employees of the organization's W-2s. So this recipient does it, sends out every single employee's W-2, which is just a treasure trove of personal data and tax refunds. So it's an automatic data breach requiring notification to all employees with W-2s, notifications to state AGs, depending on where the employees reside, and then also depending on the industry of business, certain regulators. In addition to the W-2 first-party data breaches, we hear subsequent notifications that to the compromised entity that the employee whose W-2 was compromised had a tax return fraudulently filed under their name, and so a refund was misdirected. The IRS has picked up on this a few years ago, but fraudulent tax returns are still prevalent and just a pain for the employee whose W-2 was compromised to sort out. I remember several years ago seeing images in the media of queues of victims regarding fraud that wrapped around the IRS building for several blocks. And then kind of the fallout from this, unfortunately, which is also very costly, is that plaintiffs' attorneys have picked up on these incidents. They file class actions if they can get one affected user to oblige. While these lawsuits, they don't really make it all the way to trial, and they often get kicked out at the early motion stage. They're really costly to defend and ultimately to settle, but they're also very public. Court filings are generally public, so it's costly to an organization's reputation. So, I guess in the end, Aaron, while we see an uptick in BECs, wire fraud and ransomware, we're also guaranteed to see tax fraud claims. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we're likely to see a few zero-day exploits, such as one right now as we speak. It's called Log4j, or other vendor breaches, MSPs, or like the Kaseya SolarWinds of the world. And so Coalition, it's great in that we're aware of our policyholders that may rely on exploited programs or compromised vendors. And we notify these policyholders immediately to hopefully patch or disconnect preemptively. But hey, the claims still happen. And we staff up during the holidays so that we're ready to respond. So it's never a dull moment here at our Super Bowl.
Unfortunately, insurance and cybersecurity, we rarely get to sleep. We had a great question. I'll answer this live. BEC is business email compromise. We see this as a common attack vector just because so much important work happens in email. You do things like resetting passwords. Lots of sensitive information lives in email. So we see it, unfortunately, both as a target as well as an avenue of attack. Kirsten, fantastic background. Shelley, I wanted to turn it over to you because I know that obviously for the US here, the IRS and W-2s, I know up in Canada, same thing, I believe it's the T4 and the Canadian Revenue Agency, obviously similar types of information, often folks phishing for credentials or sensitive information. And Shelley, I know that we had talked about one of the things that leads to these types of attacks is really that lack of focus, people doing stuff around the holidays that they might not normally be doing. And I know that you had some thoughts to share there.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a very good topic for discussion here. And first and foremost, I really want to echo what Kirsten said. It is very common for threat actors to leverage the holidays and any type of occasions really to customize targeted phishing emails. So during the holiday season, there is always a ramp up of Christmas-centric phishing campaigns, which of course is something to be vigilant on. Some phishing emails are curated to appear as if they are gift cards or holiday swag from legitimate partners or vendors or even the CEO. And oftentimes these phishing emails would include a link to redirect the user to an external fraudulent site where it prompts the user to enter their email credentials in order to view the supposed gift card or whatever. Other times, phishing emails come with a malicious attachment which may trigger a system level or network level malware infection. A lot of ransomware leverages this type of method as the initial vector of intrusion. So if you receive an email that appears suspicious or is just completely unexpected, always double check with the sender address or confirm with the sender. So it's the holidays. People are buying gifts. They're doing a lot of online shopping, they're doing a lot of brick and mortar shopping, and it is certainly not unusual for employees to browse online retailers from their corporate assets. This, of course, increases the cyber exposure as users are navigating to a variety of different websites. These websites could have embedded malware or links to external fraudulent sites. Users would sign up to newsletters, sign up to promotions, set up accounts on online retail websites that may be quite dodgy, or sign up to coupon sites using their corporate email addresses. And it is certainly not unheard of for employees to recycle the same passwords address that they use for their corporate access when signing up to various other things. And should these credentials be compromised by these third-party entities, which happens very often, that access could be sold on the dark web and then leveraged for additional nefarious activities. So Aaron, to answer your question, in general, people do deviate from their ordinary behaviors when it's the holiday season. There is obviously an escalation in social engineering attacks from the threat actors side, but user behavior also contributes greatly to increase in cyber exposure and higher risk of user errors. A scenario that we come across quite often as well is, say, for example, the person that typically oversees vendor payments may be away on vacation. They're taking a Christmas break, so someone else in the organization steps in for them. The individual in that substitute function may be straddling this additional responsibility with their existing day job, and they may not have the full appreciation or understanding or knowledge of the protocol for paying vendors. And this makes these individuals highly susceptible to falling victim to a phishing scam. So a lot of funds transfer fraud claims come in as a result of these checks and balances that were just improperly followed, or simply there was an absence of strict due diligence protocol when it comes to making external payments. And it is therefore very critical to ensure that there's proper contingency in the event that a key personnel is out of pocket.
Definitely, we have folks a little bit stretched, and focus can be a little bit difficult. Zoltan, I have a question that I want to kick over to you, but I've seen some great questions that have come in the Q&A first. So apologies, I'm going to put you on hold here for a minute. In terms of resources to help safeguard your employees, I would point you to our training partner Curricula. So if you log into your Coalition control dashboard, that's where you can access security awareness training. You can also set up phishing simulations to teach people how to spot emails that look suspicious or spot these kinds of things. Obviously, ideally, you should be training them before a holiday season. So if that's not something that you've done now, definitely slot it into the calendar for 2022. Interesting question that came in here, and I think I have some thoughts on this, but Shelley, I would ask you or anybody on the panel, guidance to give employees on what to watch out for on retailer websites. It's probably not feasible to tell them that they can't use a corporate device for shopping. I would agree, unless you're in a very locked down, maybe military or kind of like national security environment. Probably you can do some basic shopping on your company issued computer. What are some things that folks should watch out for to avoid winding up on a sketchy website or giving away information that they shouldn't?
So I would probably say first and foremost to maybe default to the known online retailer websites like Amazon or some of the bigger ones, as opposed to the smaller dodgy links that you would typically follow when you search for like a coupon code or something like that. I mean, the other precaution that they could take is to not use their corporate email address or any type of corporate credentials to sign up to these various platforms. There's also quite a few implementations and security protocols that you could put in place from an organizational perspective. So having adequate monitoring of endpoints, having the proper endpoint solutions in place that could detect downloading of suspicious malware or downloaded suspicious items, as well as any type of suspicious egress or ingress of malicious of any type of traffic to known attacker infrastructure or known dodgy websites. Those are the types of things that you could monitor for and potentially block. But yeah, I think as far as user behavior goes, definitely just default to the bigger retailers, the ones that are more known. There's a myriad of smaller online retailers, those that are hosted overseas would be ones to definitely watch out for. Maybe stick to the ones that are in North America or European trusted sites. Yeah, I mean, Aaron, what are some of the suggestions that you have there to add?
That was exactly going to be one of them. And I was going to point to trying to track down a gift for my niece. It's sold out in a lot of places. Some of the links that I found are either obviously stupid expensive. I'm not paying $500 for a $29.99 piece of plastic on eBay, but at least that's a site that I trust. And then there are other places or other links rather that have shown up in my searches. And yeah, I don't know the reputation of the seller. I've never heard of a particular marketplace. Always got to do that cost benefit analysis to make sure that you're not winding up on sketchy underground forums, purchasing who knows what, and having your credit card details harvested. Shelley, I think you actually mentioned something interesting that I want to kick over to Zoltan in terms of monitoring and looking for suspicious activity from an individual user perspective. Yeah, don't browse sketchy websites. Purchase only from trusted or known online retailers with a good reputation. Zoltan, from a security monitoring perspective, what do we think might be useful for folks to look out for if you're running an IT department trying to keep your users safe? And I think that actually leads us pretty nicely into our next question, which is just the overwhelming volume of inputs that we see around the holidays.
Yeah, so one of the things that I know that everyone likes to think that they're extremely special, but the truth of the matter is that almost all humans are very average, right? And one of the big things that you learn from military and then having a bit of time at a couple different jobs is you see the same thing over and over again. So from an IT team, if you have monitoring software enabled, such as QRadar or Splunk or Logarithm, don't buy Logarithm. I don't like it. But if you have that, one of the things to do is a type of analysis called long tail phish analysis. Basically, what this means is the things that happen most often, you don't actually need to look at it. Of course, eventually you'll get there and you'll review it, but the things that happen the least are the things that you should look at first. And what this generally happens is your users, right, will go to these same websites. They'll go to your Gmail suite, they'll go to Jira if that's something that you have, and they'll go to the same work functions. Whereas bad actors will deviate because they're trying to explore and learn the network. So one of the big things to do is during the holiday freeze, most people know the work that they're doing. It's not their first day or week there. You can go ahead and you can look for deviations in those patterns. And it's actually really easy to find this in traffic monitoring tools. The other thing that I always recommend to people, and this kind of goes back into the previous question, I would be very shocked if anyone in this group goes to any website that is not in the Alexa top 500. If you have the ability to, based on your firewall rules, I would actually restrict access outbound to only the top 500 websites on the internet. And anything else that you need access to, you can put in a request for. This won't cause a lot of friction for your users because, once again, your users are probably on YouTube, Google, Facebook, right? These are all top 500 websites. They might have Reddit, but if your user's going to scottyscoollightbulbs.com, they probably shouldn't be doing it at work. I know that one of the things we said is we can't expect people not to browse on corporate devices. I, like Aaron said, former military, so I say they shouldn't. I was in a security program and all that jazz, so they should not. But if at the very least, they should not be in anything outside the Alexa top 500. That would be one of the big things I would say.
Couple of thoughts on that. Want to see if anybody else has a thought, but we did have a question in here. Is it easy to find out where a site is hosted? You can do a lot of digging there. I think the person who asked that question, Zoltan's answer is actually great. If it shows up in that top 500 set of websites, those are sites that have a strong reputation. They have not been known to host malware, have not been taken down by law enforcement. Rather than trying to figure out where a site is hosted, I think I like that approach better. Make sure that it's on that list and allow that. I'd be interested to find out what we do. I heard that Amazon is actually shutting down Alexa in the new year. So,
and real quick, I'm sorry, but if you do want to find out where a website is hosted, even though I agree with Aaron, you can go on dnsdumpster.com and it will actually show you the hosting solution that's provided there.
I'll put that into the chat. This is actually a tool that we use internally sometimes to figure out DNS records when we're talking about security issues that policyholders have faced. So definitely have that bookmarked as a security pro.
The other one here, what's the name of the monitoring tool that I mentioned? So QRadar is a logging tool. There's also Splunk, which is a logging tool. There's Logarithm. I think Suricata is another one. I'm showing my age with quite a few of these, but these are all monitoring tools that are used at the enterprise level that you can monitor what goes in and out. You can also do this at personal level if you want to have fun with something like the Raspberry Pi at your actual home, so you can monitor all traffic in your house. It is a little bit longer than a weekend project if you're not very tech savvy, but those are some of the things.
I I am
For
writing
s-
these out as an answer. I'll put it into the chat. And Zoltan, would you agree? I think the category here are the SIM tools,
Yes.
security information and event management. And I will also show my age by saying ArcSight. That's still
Yes,
around.
yeah, exactly. If we can say snort, but for cell phones, what I'll say for this is if this is a corporate cell phone, your IT team should already have what we would consider something along the lines of a golden image. It'll already be locked down with MDM, a managed software, and they'll be able to provide you updates, patches, and what they allow on it. For my personal cell phone, what I'd say is you essentially do not want to jailbreak your device. If you have an Apple product, Apple is a closed ecosystem anyway, so it's very difficult to get something onto an Apple phone that has not already been cleared by Apple. For a Android OS, I would say don't download any APKs that you are not familiar with, and I would actually say don't download them at all. Only get them via the Google Store, and then only get them that have been Google verified. And even then, I would say only do updates that are required.
There's also a category of tools called mobile device management, MDM, that can let you enforce some of those restrictions. To the point that Shelley made earlier about making sure people aren't reusing passwords, you can set password policies using MDM. Keep an eye on what people are downloading and also possibly restrict company data from leaving company approved applications. You can also provide what's known as a container that just keeps all of the company data in one place. Folks can do whatever they want with the phone otherwise, but your data stays in that safe container.
I'll take the last one from Scott here. Are any browsers safer than others? I don't think this is a bad opinion, so anyone else can jump in here. All browsers, all mainstream browsers, because there's different ones, all mainstream browsers that you just listed are as safe as the other ones. Some of them, it's just more difficult to add custom features. Firefox would be the least safe here because you can add add-ons that are not fully vetted by any governing body. Chrome would probably be the safest, even though it also has that same issue, but to a lesser degree. But all of them are essentially the same. I would just say that for functionality, streamline, ease of use, Chrome is probably the best, quote unquote. I use Firefox personally, and I use Edge anytime I'm having issues troubleshooting something because it kind of has a legacy built on the back end, and it usually works with really older or deprecated websites.
I want to move on to our next topic, which is the holiday freeze, and mostly because it's a way that I could work a meme into a presentation. For those of you who might not be familiar, a freeze basically refers to stopping certain activities. And when it comes to the holidays, obviously, if you are running something like an online web store, introducing new code or introducing new features into your online web application that could cause sales to go down or transactions to be disrupted, obviously is going to be a challenge. Unfortunately, the attackers know this. So not only are we facing colder temperatures with wintertime here in North America, but we also can face some challenges or issues with addressing vulnerabilities that are discovered, issues that come up in the environment. And I'll open this up to Shelley. I know that there were some issues that we had talked about with regards specifically to patching to address vulnerabilities during a holiday freeze. I wonder if you could put some detail or give us some details around the problem in that area.
Yeah, definitely happy to. So the challenge that tends to pop up around the holiday season is a distributed employee base leading to a decentralized network because folks are traveling or they are offline. I mean, this isn't exactly new now. The pandemic has already created a fundamental shift in workforce structure where people are working remotely. And so a situation that can be quite frustrating around this time is a difficulty in pushing out security updates because the networked assets may simply be unreachable or are offline. And this can also be particularly problematic post-breach or during incident response, where the technical team simply cannot achieve eyes on glass for significant portions of the corporate network. We also tend to see an increase in ransomware and network level compromises during the holiday season. And one of these causes is due to systems migrations. A lot of organizations have this natural organic downtime around the holidays because schools are closed or folks are away, company has closed its doors until the new year, whatever the case may be. And so due to the lower burden on technical infrastructure, a lot of IT departments opt to perform system migrations during this time to take advantage of this downtime. Sometimes, if security is not being prioritized, decisions may be made to open certain ports or make certain configurations to facilitate the migration. And while this may make sense from an efficiency standpoint, this could also lead to additional exposures of low-hanging fruits that attackers scan for and capitalize off of, leading to things like unauthorized remote access and ransomware. So it is very important to prioritize security and ensure that any and all migrations are performed in a security conscientious manner. One more thing to add here is that there is a common misconception that cyber incidents like ransomware are quick and isolated. For example, we often think attacker comes in, they deploy an encryption algorithm, and then they exit. But that is pretty far from reality, because as we start to investigate ransomware matters more and more, quite often we see the attacker having been sitting in the network, sitting in the environment for weeks, months, and sometimes even up to a year before the ransomware encryption event. So the question is, why do attackers do this? Why do they sit around? Why do they wait? Well, I think Kirsten had mentioned this earlier. They're waiting for the perfect time to strike so as to exact the maximum damage, and the juice has to be worth the squeeze for them from a purely business perspective. For a lot of organizations, particularly those in retail, whether they're online, whether they're brick and mortar, the holiday season is their absolute busiest and most profitable time. The forced downtime from a cyber event could be very detrimental. There is much less appetite for downtime by these types of businesses. And so should a retailer, for example, be locked down with ransomware and be rendered inoperable during this time, they would be a lot more amenable to agreeing to an attacker's demands in order to resume operations as quickly as possible. So should it be known also that a retailer was the target of a data exfiltration event, in which case, a lot of cyber incidents do include a data theft component, and it potentially led to the leaking or exposure of thousands of customer data, that would lead to significant reputational harm, reputational beating, and significantly deter additional consumers. So again, this is a great leverage by threat actors to strong arm their victims into paying a ransom. Threat actors also capitalize off desperation, off of urgency. So it's very important to ensure that security scans and system monitoring are scrutinized during the holiday season.
Shelley, I just wanted to jump in real quick to give a practical example. At one of my previous companies, which was an airline IT company, we actually had hackers in the network for 6 months waiting for the Golden Week in Japan. And the Golden Week in Japan is a time when there's lots of festivals and there's lots of traveling that's happening in Japan. And as soon as the Golden Week started, the hackers immediately made a request, and they said, if you don't pay us within 24 hours, we'll drop the system. Now, normally in the US, this might get a little bit more scrutiny and maybe more of a call to bluff. But in Japan, there's a lot of honor and there's a lot of travel here, and this would have been a huge issue for the Japanese executives over there. So the team essentially was strong-armed into paying these folks if we did not resolve the issue as quickly as possible. So this actually led to the very beginning of Golden Week in Japan, the entire security team from around the world working overnight, 24 hours, to completely evict the hackers and ensure we had backups. Otherwise, we would have had to pay the ransomware. And we found out later traces that they had been there for 6 months, and they could have done this at any time. And they waited till literally the day that it started. And it was explicitly because of that.
Mm-hmm. So fair to say, Zoltan, you did not celebrate Golden Week in Japan that year.
I definitely did not. It was a lot of coffee.
I think that leads us to our final. I know we're coming up here on time. Looking forward into the new year, we also oftentimes have some New Year growing pains, and a topic that both I and Kirsten had some thoughts on. From my experience, I know a lot of organizations either have new people joining the team. My last 2 jobs I've started at the new year, so obviously speaks to being unfamiliar with processes, new resources purchased. If you have additional budget being added, you have new tools that can be integrated into the environment using that new budget. And this is probably largely psychological, and I don't know why as a society we still do the whole thing of New Year's resolutions and things have to end on December 31st. The reality is you wake up on January 1st and you can keep doing your to-do list, but there's that psychological hurdle of feeling like you've accomplished something by checking all of those items off. Kirsten, I'll pass it to you first on the new folks joining the team. I think you spoke about this a little bit, but we didn't cover in too much detail, kind of people doing different jobs, not being as familiar with what's happening, what's expected of them, and particularly what incidents or security threats rather to watch out for.
Yeah. So this goes hand in hand with seasonality as well. So not just new employees being onboarded in the new year, but also temporary workers taking care of seasonal shifts or extra work that needs to be done. During the seasonal time, temps can be hired, managers may be out, so temporary employees may not be properly trained up, or they are given broader responsibilities and access to get the job done. These temps may also have access to data that should otherwise be locked down, or where access should be restricted, and these users may not be using the resources correctly or using data in a way that irregular employees are usually trained up to do. And it's not saying that they're using this in a nefarious way, but it just creates a broader exposure that can be unseen, that you can't see. So it's problematic from a security perspective, but more importantly, from the claim standpoint, this is problematic from a data privacy standpoint. A data breach is when someone not authorized to have access has access to personally identifiable information. And if a temporary worker or new employee shouldn't have access, but is granted access to get the job done, it could be in certain circumstances a presumed data breach. So same, in the new year, there may be a rush to get new employees brought up to speed, maybe loosely following standard operating procedures, or where managers are focusing more on the onboarding process and less on not paying as much attention to exposed vulnerabilities.
Definitely took me at least 3 months to feel like I knew where everything was at Coalition and what things were normal versus what things might be unusual in terms of the types of emails, just given the broad number and range of industries that our policyholders come from. So is this a phishing email or is it something legitimate? It takes a certain amount of experience there. I like to think of that process as tuning, pulling that from technology whenever a new platform is put in place. And Zoltan, I may pick on you here if you have any thoughts. I've actually worked on the rollout of a SIM tool. These are tools that pull in log data from a variety of systems, help you to highlight things that are potentially suspicious. Everyone's IT environment looks a little bit different. So these tools generate a lot of false positives at the front end, and they require tuning to mark certain things, oddities, quirks, little bits of your network that might be legacy that are normal, that could potentially be suspicious. Good example, failed logins. If you have a large and complex Active Directory environment, you have multiple applications trying to talk across domains, you'll get a lot of noise coming out of your Active Directory that is not necessarily indicative of an attack. People trying every possible password. Could be a brute force attack. It could just be an old legacy application that doesn't play nicely with your new Active Directory environment and generates a lot of failed logins. You want to tune your platform to say this is a known issue. It is not indicative of a security incident. Out of the box, the tool is going to generate those false positives. And I think obviously when people start a job, there's a tuning process. When you put a new tool into the environment, you got to go through that tuning process. So that kind of is a double whammy. It adds more noise, makes it harder to figure out if something is actually malicious. And more importantly, it can also lead to an overload or a burden of too many alerts. People get a little bit burnt out. Zoltan, I know you've been on an analyst in an analyst role as part of a security operations center. Any thoughts on having more alerts versus having fewer alerts?
Yeah, so it's actually a very tight rope. And I would say that the biggest thing is depending on the size of your team, I would actually say that it directly correlates, right? The larger your team, the more alerts you can have, the more fancy you can get with it. The biggest things is that you actually have to understand, and this is me speaking after kind of like experience and thinking about it after no longer doing it. You have to know what you're looking for at some level, because otherwise the alerts are just going to be noise and the human part of an analyst is just going to start tuning them out. So if the very first thing you're looking for, I would actually say, is to get somewhat compliant, you can use kind of like the NIST standard or the ISO 27001 standard. And once you have those things in place, proper logging, proper access to systems, HTTP removed, then you can start looking for the way that things get a little wonky. You can look for traversal across the network. You can look for privilege escalation. You can look for accessing of resources outside of proper business hours. And then you can move into that. But I would say that a cultivated list of valuable alerts. So generally what'll happen is they'll give you the SIM, the tool, and they'll try and upcharge you with having like a consultant come in for the first 3 to 6 months. If your team is smaller, I would actually recommend that you take that, have them help you create a couple of alerts, have those alerts work, be of value. And then after that point, you can go ahead and start creating more and more and more. And even if you have a large number of alerts that don't provide value, you'll know that and you can tune those. But I think it's very core at the very beginning to have a set amount of alerts that have value and you know why they're there. And if they trigger, you have a good SOP, standard operating procedure, of what you're going to do with those alerts and how to action them.
Good deal. And then in terms of wrapping up stuff, this is just, again, going back to a personal example. I have my to-do list. I want to make sure everything has a line through it. Sometimes that can lead to a little bit of rush, a little bit of hurried activity. You're not necessarily putting as much effort into things as you otherwise would, making sure that folks realize, hey, the business is still going to be here come January 1st. We would prefer that you do things correctly and not do them in a rush is always a good important point to make sure that you're reinforcing. With that said, those are some of the problems that we've seen. Again, we had a real life example of this back on July 4th with the Kaseya breach. I think we're still seeing some ongoing issues with this related to Log4j, the Apache logging library vulnerability that was recently disclosed. Unfortunately, we all saw this with SolarWinds last year, right around the holiday season. So what are some key takeaways, ways that we can, or ways rather that you can implement in your business to hopefully avoid these issues from impacting you from rising to the level of a security incident? And I'll run through these, but panelists, if you guys have any thoughts on this, feel free to jump in anywhere. First and foremost is making sure that you have adequate coverage for your cyber insurance. The best laid plans do occasionally go astray. So if you do have an incident, having insurance can help. I've actually seen a couple of questions. Does Coalition cover this? Is that included in my policy? The answer, unfortunately, is always going to be, it depends. We can do different coverages, different limits. Making sure that your insurance is properly sized for your business is something that your insurance broker can help you out with. So making sure you have coverage for whatever type of business you're in, making sure you have adequate coverage based on your revenue or the value of data is something that a broker can help you out with. So we would point you to them.
And can I jump in?
Absolutely.
So on that note too, so think of cyber insurance, whether it's with one carrier or another, not so much first party reimbursement, but do think of your cyber policy really as your partner, and I hate to say it, quarterback, throughout the duration of an incident if you are experiencing a cyber attack. Cyber insurance carriers, they do this all day, every day. So they provide guidance. Think of them as a partner. They'll appoint a breach coach, experienced vendors to respond. And then, at the very end, thought leadership in terms of remediation and next steps. And so for me personally, as someone, just as an employee of an organization, I could not imagine managing a cyber breach on my own without all these partners at my side. So we do appreciate, in any carrier really, to get the call as soon as possible so that we can run point with you rather than getting the call after all is said and done, just to make sure that data privacy obligations are being met, compliance is being met, but also that you are in the best security posture possible post-incident.
Unlike auto insurance, where USAA can't really help me too much if I need medical attention after I've been in a car accident, with cyber insurance, yeah, Kirsten, you can put folks in touch with the right resources. Our Coalition Incident Response Team, Shelley, for example, might be part of an investigation and recovery. We're here to help out. We do actually have those skills and resources available. So report early, often. I think I've said it in every webinar that I've delivered when talking about incidents, so might as well say it in this one, wrap out the year strong. Other good recommendation, make sure that you stay on top of patching and vulnerability management. Make sure that those systems are patched as soon as possible. Ideally, there should be a push before people leave for the holidays. One of the big challenges, at least that I've run into in prior career, people sometimes take 2 or 3 weeks off around the holidays, which means that if there's a critical patch that needs to be pushed out to their computers, if they're not turning their computer on every day, I have no way of patching that. Obviously, if the computer's not turned on, it can't be exploited, but when those folks come back from vacation, I do need to make sure I have a process to make sure that those patches get applied ASAP. Maybe even quarantining folks who've been out on vacation until we can assure that their computer is brought back up to speed. When we talk about technology risks, we talk about cyber risks, sometimes folks are like, why is HR in the mix here? HR cyber hygiene can be a proactive way to make sure that around the holidays, if you do have folks filling in for a role that they're not as familiar with, if they've been cross-trained, if you have job rotation, if, for example, I shadow the CIR team for a couple of days, and let's say that Shelly's out on vacation. I may not be fully able to do her job, but I can at least handle some of the basics. I at least have some familiarity. You don't want to be scrambling to find out if there's a doctor on the plane as soon as somebody has a heart attack. If at all possible, you want to be proactive about that. So keep in mind your technology risk management, your cyber risk mitigation can actually extend outside the IT department, folks like HR, folks like your accounts payable, where you do have a lot of different roles, you do have different duties being performed. You want to make sure people are properly aware. I think we talked about this one, data privacy and security, making sure that around the holidays for anything special that might be happening, those W-2s or T4s being sent out, make sure that people are aware of good best practices. Don't share those documents, don't request sensitive information via email, don't share sensitive information via email, especially around current holiday periods like at the end of the year when tax forms are being sent out. Remainder of our recommendations here, want to make sure we leave some time for our Q&A here at the end for access controls. And this speaks to the point that Shelly was talking about a little bit, as well as Kirsten. Making sure that new employees, or particularly if you bring on temporary employees to deal with holiday demand, make sure that they're being properly trained. Make sure that you have a strong training program in place. Make sure as well that you're thinking about who has access to data and who has access to systems. Your HR processes may focus only on full-time employees, but if you're bringing on temporary workers or you're bringing on contractors to deal with a spike in holiday demand, make sure that those folks are being trained as well. We've seen a lot of data breaches, a lot of security incidents because somebody without adequate training, somebody who just didn't know any better, clicked a link, opened a document, provided some credentials, and bam, you had a security incident. Again, being a little bit proactive here, it might be too late to try and do this right now just because we're almost at the end of the year. But when we talk about online applications, particularly if you are an online retailer, if you do have an online presence that your customers, that your business partners are making use of, we do see a lot of DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service. Basically, a site or an application is overwhelmed by too much traffic and is knocked offline. This could be malicious. It could also, unfortunately, be accidental. Zoltan, I think you're the one that mentioned Reddit. There's something known as the Reddit kiss of death. When a website gets really popular on Reddit, all of Reddit's millions of users start clicking the link that was posted on Reddit to go and visit that website. The volume of traffic knocks the site offline. It's a good thing that you're getting recognized, but that excessive amount of attention can also unfortunately be a downside. So wherever possible, look at putting tools and platforms in place. Coalition policyholders have access to DDoS mitigation through Cloudflare. If you're not sure if that's right for you, look at some peer organizations. Do other organizations in your field see a spike in holiday traffic? If they do, a DDoS mitigation tool might be appropriate for you. And last and most importantly, and I think this goes into, rather speaks to several of the questions that we've gotten, make sure that you have something like an acceptable use policy. Make sure that your employees, whether those are internal employees, staff, augmentation via contractors, or temporary employees, make sure that they're aware of those policies. And also make sure that you have cyber security, cyber hygiene training, ideally that's being delivered throughout the year. And again, as a coalition policyholder, you have access to Curricula, our training provider. As a policyholder, you do have free licenses to the Curricula platform. So once a month, all of your employees will receive some web-based training. It's actually really great training. We use it internally at Coalition, so we can vouch for it. People do enjoy it. They do learn. It's not death by PowerPoint, and it's not overly burdensome. Specific to what we talked about here, and again, going back to something that Shelly had mentioned, making sure your acceptable use policy, if some personal browsing is allowed on company issued laptops, if people can use their work email address for some limited personal use, make sure that people are aware of what is and is not acceptable. Shopping on Amazon.com, probably not going to be able to prevent people from doing that. Shopping on auction sites or things that are not well known, online storefronts that don't have a good reputation, those should be on the do not do list in your acceptable use policy. Which brings us to our Q&A, and we've got about 5 minutes here. Saw a couple of questions in, a couple of questions in here that I wanted to make sure we address. As a broker and a client, Michelle, great question. I think for client resources as a policyholder, that's going to be in coalition control. If you have questions around specific to your brokerage, that would be in your broker portal. So you're going to be a bit of a unique case there in that you have access to both platforms. Most of our Coalition policyholder resources are accessible from Coalition Control, and I'll put a link to that in the chat. I'm actually going to kick this next question over to the panelists. Is there an easy way to tell if an email is being spoofed?
I'm going to jump in quick and just say I would look at the header. If you're on your personal computer, normally you'll be able to see like a name, and then if it's really wonky, like 177877729@gmail.com, it's probably being spoofed. That's the easiest way. And now I'm going to step back because I think that's the right answer. Kristen, go.
Yeah, and then also from at an organization level, if I don't know, on Office 365 or Gmail, sometimes the organization can mark it as really loud. Hey, this is an email coming from outside of your organization. Pay closer attention and make sure it's someone that you trust. Because I can be getting an email from Aaron, who is in my organization, but if it's spoofed, that email program should catch that it's outside of the environment.
Yeah, I think those are the easiest ways. Everything else other than that is like analyzing header information, which is too technical for the time we have left.
Yeah, and also I think just generally, when you do read the subject or the content of the email, another surefire way is typos, language that you wouldn't ordinarily recognize from that user, maybe pronouns put in a different place, which indicates it's being translated from a Google translator. Just if the tone is off, that's kind of suspect as well.
And one more thing, embedded images where you're not expecting them. If it's a body of text and when you move your mouse over it, it lets you click it, don't click it. It's trying to spoof you.
Mm-hmm.
Shelley posted some great information in the chat as well. And I think that speaks to something that Coalition hammers on. If you've ever seen one of our Coalition risk assessments, we have an email security as a separate section there. We talk about two technologies, DMARC and SPF. If SPF only means staying safe at the beach and not getting sunburnt to you, it's totally fine. Make sure that you have appropriate IT or security resources. If you don't, you can schedule a call with the Coalition Security Support Center, and our customer success team can help you talk through that as well. The other thing that I would throw in there just as well, make sure that if there's a call to action in the email and it's raising a sense of urgency, click here to verify something. Otherwise, you're going to lose access to your account in the next 24 hours. Most IT departments don't actually send out stuff like that. Most IT processes don't actually work like that. If somebody is that desperate to get a hold of you, they should have your contact details. They should be able to pick up the phone and call you. An email that looks really urgent, that you have to do something immediately, otherwise you're going to lose access, probably should raise your suspicion. And also anything that you weren't expecting. I did incident response during the London Olympics, or rather in the lead up to it, and we got hit as an organization by a series of phishing emails. Click here to download your London Olympics ticket. It asked you to verify credit card information. People gave out their credit card details. The first question that I always asked when I was doing the investigation was, do you plan to go to London? Have you purchased tickets? Did you sign up for Olympics tickets? Have you bought a plane ticket? Do you have a hotel? And the answer 100% was no. I didn't want to be snarky, but the follow-up question then was, well, then why did you click on this link and give a credit card detail for tickets that you have no memory of purchasing? We can get into the philosophy there, a little bit off topic, but again, if it's not something that you're expecting, treat it with a little bit of suspicion. Because a lot of folks have asked this, yes, there will be a recording of this webinar. We will follow up via email if you registered, so you will get a copy of the webinar that you can share or go back and rewatch. If you have questions outside of this training, great question, go to control.coalitioninc.com. You should have an account there as a policyholder, and you can access the chat, which connects you to our customer success team. And you can also set up security office hours calls with our security support center, and you can access it through Control as well. As a resource, we have the Coalition Cybersecurity Guide. You can access that here. I know that we're a little bit over time here, so at this point, want to say thank you not only to our panelists for joining us, but also to all of our attendees. If we don't talk to you before the new year, hope you enjoy your holidays. Hope you have a happy new year. Thanks for joining us, and stay safe.
Stay safe.